Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference. Today, the Musical Innertube welcomes back a great friend of the podcast, Mr. Nick Roman, a 44-year veteran of California Public Radio, and that ain't hay. For years, he was the host of NPR's All Things Considered on KPCC, the public radio station based in Pasadena. And before joining them, Roman served as a producer, anchor, and news director for KLON/KKJZ in Long Beach for 20 years, and he's taught broadcast journalism at Cal State Universities at Fullerton and also at Long Beach. And we hear he's been invited back at Long Beach. Is that the one, Nick?
Yes, it is. I loved it there. It's a great school.
He is an alumnus of KUCI, the student radio station at the University of California at Irvine.
That was another great place.
That was a really great place. And we all were there at one time or other, weren't we, Don?
Yes, we were.
Don was usually there at the other time, where Nick was a really good football and basketball player on top of everything else he did well. So welcome, Mr. Nick Roman. Welcome back. And we are talking baseball because there's a lot of baseball to be discussed. It's some of the best baseball I've ever seen. I don't know if you think so, Nick, but I think that the playoff scheme in Major League Baseball has produced probably the greatest baseball in the history of the sport. I mean, some of the most amazing games, just the greatest tension. What do you think?
You don't even have to go to the playoffs. I mean, because that system is in place, the Braves and the Mets played that doubleheader on the Monday after most teams ended their season. And I don't know what you were doing, but I was sitting here watching two games, and the first game was crazy. It was nuts. And I was texting friends of mine and looking at this game and coming out and telling my wife, and I go, oh, the Braves have this one. No, the Mets have this one. No. Now the Braves have it. Now, wait a minute. The Mets won the game. That was nuts. It's one of the most historic games. And it's only because that game meant something because there's a playoff system.
Exactly.
I was present at the second wild card game that the Orioles played against Kansas City. And the elimination is so swift. That wild card round is 3 games. So it's, you win, 2 and you're in, and you lose the first one. And now, oh my God, you've only got 2 more. So, it puts everybody on the brink right away. You have to play excellent baseball. And the Kansas City Royals in that second game against the Orioles played excellent baseball. They didn't hit for power. They hit for singles. They hit a couple of doubles. They moved runners on base. They played excellent defense, and they managed to, and the scores were like 3-2 and 2-1. It wasn't high scoring, but it was excellent baseball. And, the Orioles, unfortunately, were swinging for the fences most of the time. And, that cost them the game. And I think teams that are built to slug don't do well in this playoff format.
You have to be really good at fielding, because you make an error and it's going to cost you. I've been watching the Dodgers and the Padres. The error that Manny Machado made in Game 1 made a difference. I mean, runs came in as a result of that. And yesterday, because the Padres caught the baseball, Jurickson Profar going into the stands and snatching a Mookie Betts home run away, a drive into the alley that Fernando Tatis ran down and caught, and a line drive that Luis Arraez snagged at first base. Any of those go through, it's a totally even the game with the final score was 10-2. But if any of those go through, the score is not 10-2. It's a completely different ball game.
And the way that the Dodgers won that first game, when their superstar Ohtani went out there and just slugged his way through the game and made a difference. But that's the same thing when the Phillies came to their second game against the Mets. Bryce Harper stepped up. It was 6 innings in, but he finally hit a home run, almost to the second home run in the 9th to seal it. And then right behind him, Castellanos hit another home run and then hit that single at the end to win it. But again, the Mets are the zombie team, I want to say. They keep coming back and coming back and coming back. You score a couple on them, they score a couple the next inning.
I mean, we all thought that the Mets, they were finished midway through the season, and they looked finished.
Yeah.
And, they weren't playing well at all. Lindor was having a terrible season, and then all of a sudden, and Brandon Nimmo wasn't hitting at all either. And then all of a sudden, the whole thing turns around on you, and life is great, at least for the Mets. And they've been, the other thing is, they talk about home field advantage. What home field advantage? The Mets haven't been home in about a month and a half, it seems like. I don't know. They must be carrying around giant foot lockers of clothing, for these road trips that they're making.
But that brings up another thing, which is that it turns out that the team on the road, the team at the greatest disadvantage, wins most of the time in the division and league series. They beat the better teams. The wild card hangers on tend to win the 3 and 5 game series. They're over 500 in that way. So, we've been talking several years running now about how the Atlanta Braves are always favored, don't do well, they get beat, right? And a lot of teams like the Dodgers were expected to go a long way last year and again this year. And they may still this year. We're early days yet, but last year they flamed out. The Phillies got clocked by the D-backs. It's interesting, isn't it, that something about this setup lets the desperate hangers on, and it doesn't let them win. They tend to win.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I sometimes I wonder, for those of us who have experiences of kids who played, travel athletics, whether it was soccer or basketball or my daughter softball, and you would go off somewhere, like we spent like a week in Denver playing softball games. If it's camaraderie, if it's focus, if it's like you got nothing else to think about except baseball and that game tonight, and it's the one time, in the day where, you just sort of feel alive. I don't know. But it doesn't seem to determine who's the winner if you're playing on your home field. Oh, you get to stay home and rest and everything is fine. I don't know. It's hard to say.
I look at it, too, from the standpoint of going to home games in Baltimore and in Philly this year. And, everybody was worried because the Braves stayed home the last 2 seasons and the Phillies beat them. And one of the things Brian Snitker, the manager, said was, well, maybe we got a little too complacent. We had some time off and we weren't, playing. And sure enough, the Phillies came out against the Mets in that first game and couldn't hit a thing.
Yeah.
Couldn't hit. If the Mets walked up and held the baseball in front of them and said, here, hit this, they'd still strike out. So, there's some validity, I think, to these teams that have to keep playing, that have to play through the wild card, and they sort of keep that energy going, and there's something to be said for that.
It's there are a million theories. If you look back in the history of the World Series, for the longest time, it was the team, the home team wasn't winning that final game. And then for a long time, it was the home team. It made a big difference. I think, in terms of baseball, all that stuff kind of goes out the window. I don't think that being on the road is a disadvantage to you. And what is a disadvantage is if you're rested and you're healthy. Certainly, if your pitchers are healthy, and the Dodgers have gone through that, the Braves have gone through that. All of that makes a difference. And at what point in the season did everything sort of fall into place for your team? Which seems to be happening now with the Mets, had been happening for the Tigers until they ran into the Cleveland Guardians, a very, very good team. Same with the Royals. Nobody thought I certainly didn't think the Royals were going to make the playoffs this year.
No.
And then injuries just tear you apart. And that's certainly was the fate of the Braves. They just got totally beat up.
Yeah. And again, going back to what you said earlier, the Tigers and the Royals played like hell for the last couple of weeks of the season in order to get into, because again, in a normal year, in a normal situation, without, as many wild card teams now as they let in, they wouldn't have had a chance to get in, but they snuck in at the last minute. And it's only because they got healthy at the right time and had all their players back. And maybe some of the teams they played were kind of worn out by the end of the seasons. 162 games winds up being an awful lot to play.
It's enormous. And, if you add into that, it's like specialized games, like, hey, we're going to fly you guys to London to play.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Dodgers and Padres, you're going to start the season in Korea. You just like, wait, what? We're doing what? But that's the kind of thing that happens.
And you know what's weird? In London, it was Phillies and Mets. Now they're playing playoff.
Yeah.
And in Korea, it was Dodgers and Padres. Now they're playing playoff.
Yeah. Well, maybe it does. Maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah, I take that back. One of the things we're hearing from local fans for all of the teams are that some folks are complaining. I'm not saying this. I'm just throwing it out there. Some folks are complaining about like 4:00 start times.
Yeah.
That, it's tough for batters. And there is some evidence that this is the case, because in many of these games, the first half of the game is all zeros. And then somewhere around the middle half of the game, you start seeing the scoring and suddenly crooked numbers for the rest of the time. And that's because the sun has now gotten lower, where you don't get a bright background behind the pitcher and you can see it better. I don't know. To me, I feel a couple of ways about that. First of all, baseball used to be a sunshine sport. It was never played at night, and,
the World Series certainly wasn't.
Yeah.
Right. The World Series was on in the daytime, and, until, what was the last World Series game played during the day? Was it 2004? Something like that. It's been 20 years.
Yeah. The first night game was in 1971. I know that.
Yeah.
And it was the Pirates and the Orioles, and slowly but surely they added on. But good luck convincing the owners to, or the TV networks to give up a primetime audience, because they won't do it. It's just really not going to happen. There is some, obviously there's some day baseball during the early rounds of the playoffs. But
right now, that's right.
Exactly. Because somebody says, well, do you want to have the Dodgers or the Yankees in the prime time, or do you want to have the Cleveland Guardians in prime time? And so the Cleveland, Detroit game started, bright, sunshiny day, nice day, in Cleveland. So, yeah, I lament that too. I lament, the fact that, it's tough for little kids to stay up and watch some of these games at night. I mean, I went to Catholic school when I was a kid, and the nuns would turn the World Series on. We would watch the ball games in class.
You could go up to the nun. I remember in 4th grade. Oh man, this was Dodgers, Yankees. Ooh, when the Dodgers swept the Yankees in '63. Right. And you had to go up to Sister Mary Antonio to Immaculate Heart of Mary School and say, I'm going to be wearing my ear plug, my earphone, which is such a huge, and I had my, transistor. And as long as you told her, she wouldn't send you to the principal's office, and there were about 20 of us. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but there were a bunch of us not paying attention to anything. Mr. Stimpay, conjugate SNA. Excuse me, it's 4th inning. So
Sister,
those are great. Yeah, but about starting times, I mean, isn't there some evidence that they've heard that complaint, because starting times got earlier by like half an hour this year, 6:00 instead of 6:30, and games are shorter. Isn't there an effort to say, okay, none of this midnight baseball in October, which we were getting to have in the 90s.
Well, of course, the one rule that got dropped, that gets dropped in the playoffs when you get to postseason, is the tiebreaker rule about putting a ghost runner at second base if you're in extra innings. That one's gone. You're back to regular baseball. But the pitch count, the pitch clock is still in effect. The pickoff limits are still in effect. The bases are still as big as they were when they, increased the size. And so, I think what they didn't want is to have a game, like that one some years back, Dodgers and Boston Red Sox at Dodger Stadium, where I was on air when that game started, and I was home at like midnight watching it when it ended.
Yeah.
It was like a 7.5 hour game, and they don't want that, obviously, but the earlier start times, you're going to mess with, you're going to mess with the sun. It also depends on how the field might be oriented. You remember the famous line by Yogi Berra about Yankee Stadium in October. He says it gets late early there. And it's true.
Yeah. No, there was some noise made about shadows in a couple of the games because they were in the afternoon and the pitcher was in the sunlight and the batter was in the dark, and it was harder to keep the ball going. But, John was right. He made a point about pitchers, again, I go back to Mets and Phillies. Those Mets pitchers are not aces, and the Phillies weren't getting any hits off them at all. Now the Phillies bats have kind of gone hot and cold, mostly cold, over the last half of the season.
Yeah.
But
I feel for Alec Bohm.
Yeah, the poor guy hurt his hand and hasn't come back, and and he was a doubles machine for a while there, and can't do anything now. But still, I would probably say that that might have something to do with it too. That you can't get a good look at the ball when it comes out of the pitcher's hands to figure out what to do with it.
They're not, it's all money. It's all TV times and it's all money. It's all, can we avoid the NFL, which is one reason why the American League is playing today and didn't play yesterday to avoid, conflicts with NFL games. It's all money. I remember some years ago, a friend of mine was complaining about the outfield walls of Dodger Stadium. I remember when there weren't any ads on, and I go, yeah, I remember that too. But welcome to the 21st century. One interesting thing, I don't know if you guys noticed this. There's an ad now on batting helmets that popped up in the playoffs, and I'm looking at this and I'm going, Strauss, what is Strauss? I've never seen this before. And I looked at, and then when I saw that it was on the helmets in every ball game, didn't make any difference who was playing. Well, they just found another thing to sell.
Yeah, and they all now have patches on their sleeves that they've sold to individual sponsors. And I think the one that was on the Atlanta Braves sleeves was a concrete company. I don't know whether that was bad luck because, they didn't make it through the playoffs, but, whatever.
Well, so this is really the monetization of space, isn't it? For many years, there were rules in the major leagues that you couldn't have ad space. Yeah. For a while, you had ad space everywhere. The big green monster in Boston used to have nothing but ads plastered over it back in like the 1920s. Must have looked god awful.
Yeah.
And I've noticed, and everyone's noticed, that they are using computer ads where we can have a little ad on the pitcher's mound while he's warming up. Joe's Bar, and then the people have asked me this when we've been watching a baseball game and there's animated ads behind the catcher and umpire.
Yep.
And I have to explain, no one's seeing those ads. They're not existing in the real world. Those are in the studio. Those have been paid for. And, you see the batter get up with the bat and they've got a flickering alias on the edges of them because they're in front of the ads. It's become, well, as you say, it's money. It's big, big, big business. I became aware of it, not in this sport, but in tennis, where every single possible square inch of people's bodies and their uniforms and the walls are just plastered with ads.
Well, in the broadcasts years ago, it would show up in an audio kind of way. I mean, Mel Allen, who did the games for the Yankees, a home run for the Yankees was a Ballantine Blast. Ballantine beer was the sponsor. I can remember Vin Scully during Dodger games, saying at some point in the middle of the game, "Hope you're holding hands with a cold Oli." Olympia Beer was the broadcaster for the Dodgers. One of the interesting things about the Dodgers is for many years, there were no ads inside the stadium, save for that 76 ball that was up above the two scoreboards.
Right.
And the reason for that was that the chairman of Union Oil had floated a loan to O'Malley to help him build the ballpark. And the deal was for 20 years.
Walter O'Malley.
Yeah. For 20 years, I get the only in-stadium ad. And so he did. That was a long time ago. And now everything, as you say, is covered. I'm surprised that, I'm surprised they're not slapping ads on us as we walk into the stands. But in fact, they are. I mean, here, John, take this Phillies towel sponsored by somebody.
Lucio's Bakery.
Wave it around.
Right. Lucio's Bakery. Right.
Yeah.
Or Tony Luke's cheesesteaks, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the rally towels. John and I went to a playoff game last year, and I'm trying to remember who sponsors were on the rally towels. But yeah. And the same thing when I went to that Orioles game a couple of days ago. They had rally towels that were sponsored, and they thanked the sponsors on the scoreboard, or on a Jumbotron. It's not a scoreboard anymore. It's a Jumbotron.
Now, the Big A at Anaheim, before they had stands behind the outfield walls, the Big A had was that a 76? What was the big, huge ad?
I thought it was Chevron, but I'm not. I thought it was Chevron, but I'm not sure.
Maybe it was Chevron. So the oil companies had a hand in both of those teams. Because that ad on the Big A was permanente. It would have taken millions of dollars to take it down. I think it persisted long after the contract went away. I'm just not sure, but it was always there.
Well, they're not Shea Stadium and they're not Connie Mack Stadium. It's Citi Field and Citizens Bank Park. It's Petco Park in San Diego, where it's Progressive Field. Comerica Park in Detroit. Everybody, the few that don't have that, because my guess is there would be riots, would be Dodger Stadium and Yankee Stadium, and Fenway Park. I suppose you really couldn't change that name either.
No, you couldn't.
But if it stays in place for a little while, somebody's going to sell.
Exactly.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So don't stand around too long.
I mean, I think that it's interesting that we bring this up because in Philly, you never say Citizens Bank Park. It's always, I'm going to the bank. We've got a nickname for it because nobody actually wants to give the bank the ad by saying the name. Except that when you are on the radio or television, the announcers always have to say Citizens Bank Park. They're not going to, occasionally if they get, it's Bedlam at the bank. That's a wonderful call, by our great, announcers. And that one's going to stick. I think, people talk about Bedlam at the bank all the time.
Let's talk about some of the heroes of these games because, it wasn't exactly Bedlam at the bank, but, in the second game between the Mets and the Phillies, it was Bryce Harper that got it rolling with a home run. In the first game between the Dodgers and the Padres, it was Shohei Ohtani who lit up the ballpark. And it actually wasn't Judge and Soto in that first win by the Yankees. It was Volpe who came in and suddenly was hitting the ball all over the park, and he couldn't touch anything through most of the season. So there are some regular heroes and some surprise heroes that come out of postseason play.
It's always been that way. Ted Williams got to play in one World Series and didn't hit a lick. And then you have some others that, like Reggie Jackson, who went crazy, famous is all get out and went crazy in one World Series. Bryce Harper is just, to me, is just amazing. It's sort of like you go to the ballpark. As a Dodger fan, I would go to the ballpark, and it was much like when I used to watch the Dodgers playing the Phillies when the Phillies had Mike Schmidt. Well, okay, Schmidt's going to hit a home run, so you just mark that down. I'll just save it for whatever inning it occurs because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You just, that at bat, I was watching during that at bat, and you just kind of think, he can't actually, it's so predictable that he's going to hit this home run, but it's not really going to happen. I'm not looking at reality, am I?
And everybody was saying so.
Exactly.
Everybody on television was saying, "Oh boy, it's time for Bryce." Don't you think Bryce is due for a home run? Boy, it'll be funny if he really hit one. Well, let's see. No pressure here, Bryce. Yeah, and just so that at bat, as you say, Nick, 99 miles an hour that pitch was right down Broadway. Not a very well thrown pitch by Severino, but the fact that it ended up 431 feet away, hitting the batter's eye, that brick wall in back of center field, prodigious. What do you say about something like that?
I heard some discussion today that, that as good as Severino was in that ball game, that when he gave up the single to Trey Turner, which preceded Harper's home run, that was the moment where the Mets manager should have said, "Well, I've got a lefty down in the bullpen. Maybe I should bring that guy in," and he didn't. And then the baseball went flying, and then Castellanos followed with another one, which that was the real sort of like nail. Although it actually turned out to be not the nail.
Yeah.
That
was the first nail.
It was the first nail.
Before the zombies came back.
You hit those moments where there is a choice to be made and you don't make it. And it's defensible for managers, but they just get lit for all that kind of stuff.
Well, managers also tend to acquiesce to the pitchers. I want to say if a pitcher has been pitching, Severino wasn't a great pitcher, but he was doing really well on that game. And he moved the ball around enough to fool them. And got a couple of strikeouts and was, chugging along. And it's the sixth inning, and that's always the inning where you sit back and say, how much does this guy have left in the tank? Can I trust him for two more outs in this inning and then bring in the relief in the seventh, or do I drop him now? And normally in playoff games, they drop. They go to the bullpen really quickly. But I think what they did here was just said, well, let's give him two more outs. As a matter of fact, I think there was a conference on the mound before Harper came up. And I thought at that point they're going to pitch around Harper to get to Castellanos because Castellanos is a free swinger and they can probably, he had been booed a couple innings earlier by the Phillies faithful for swinging at a couple of pitches that were pretty much outside and away. And,
wait, Philly fans booed somebody?
Yeah, they booed their own guy.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. Can you believe it? It's amazing. And it's funny because he swung at a couple of bad pitches, and then there was a third pitch by Severino that went in the dirt, and he didn't swing at it, and they applauded. They actually probably did Castellanos a favor because I think he got a little pissed, and I think he locked in after that, and that's after that he started getting hit after hit after hit. But yeah, I think they were on the mound trying to figure, well, should we pitch around Harper? And I guess they said, no, I think I can get him. And I think it was an 0-2 pitch that he had because I think he took one and then he swung at a couple bad ones. And then that one was right down the plate.
He's amazing to me. He's amazing in a lot of sort of ways that, for one, there are not many ball players that come into Major League Baseball as celebrated as he was. He was supposed to be a star, and it turned out that he is. And then he switches teams for a gigantic contract, and we've all seen those kind of contracts just sort of fizzle out and go the wrong way. Not this time. And then he suffers, a number of pretty bad injuries that force him out of the outfield and onto first base. And all he does is become a really good first baseman, a guy you can really depend on when you need to have a home run. He hits them. He just does.
He doesn't need any more praise from here, but he did a lot of things in that game that show up but are not much discussed. I mean, he made 3 or 4 stellar plays at first, as you mentioned, but also he takes that extra base.
He does.
His base running is amazing. He gets into scoring position because he knows that's his job, and he runs that way. And he scored 2 runs, in the game, which it was, of course, amazing. He got, I think was he the one who scored the winning run? It was
Turner.
It was Trey Turner.
Turner was on base, but he was on before that. Turner was on second.
He was on there, yes. So I just think he plays the game within the game amazingly well, and then he's a showman on top of it, like Profar is. Yeah. Right? And there's a lot of showmen on the Mets, right? Pete Alonso it's great to watch him play because he enjoys it so much, and Lindor, who is splendid and is a showman. I mean, they all are showmen. They all are more than players, these guys. It's spectacular to watch.
Where did Vientos come from?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, he's hitting home runs. And again, here's a guy who didn't make a lot of difference during the regular season, and now he's stepping up.
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky in that we've seen, when we all came up as kids, we got to see the greatest players, Mays, Aaron, Clemente, Mickey Mantle, and then succeeding generations of tremendous ball players who followed them. And now another whole group that's tons of fun to watch. And because of the playoffs, you get to see many more of these guys. I hope people get to see, Jose Ramirez in Cleveland and see how good he is, because he's a very, very good ball player. And, and then there are new stars and new heroes that come out all the time, like for the Padres, Jackson Merrill, the center fielder who, we knew the kid was good. We didn't think he was going to be a center fielder. And we certainly didn't think he was going to be such a great clutch ball player in critical games, but he sure is. So all that's, it helps the sport. It helps the league. And allays a lot of concerns about, what's, that baseball is too boring or baseball is not what it once was. I'll say this, and this is what I've really been thinking about for a couple of days. Here's my one great concern, and that is they're killing pitchers, and I don't know what to do about it. They're just, pitchers are dropping like flies, and we saw that a lot with the Dodgers. I haven't followed the Phillies so closely to know if it's been happening to the Phillies. Certainly know it happened to the Braves, but so many pitchers. I mean, even for the Padres, we get into the playoffs, and then Joe Musgrove goes down because he's got to have Tommy John surgery because something snapped in his elbow. And
the Texas Rangers, who are the defending champions, aren't even in the playoffs,
right?
Because
exactly.
they didn't have a pitcher that could hold up all the way through. They were depending on a lot of recycled pitchers like Verlander and
Jacob DeGrom.
And DeGrom didn't come up. He didn't even hit the mound until halfway through the season.
And 10 years ago, we would have been talking a lot about how the New York Mets had this amazing pitching staff that had Jacob DeGrom, that had Matt Harvey, that had Noah Syndergaard. And what happened to, it sort of like harkened back to the old Nolan Ryan, Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman days,
right? Who
were durable pitchers who pitched all the way into their 40s. Harvey, Syndergaard, and DeGrom have just, Harvey's gone. Syndergaard is probably gone. I think he's thinking about maybe coming back next year if he can, we saw him with the Dodgers and you saw him with the Phillies. There was nothing there. And DeGrom, if his arm can hold up, but he's not going to be 20-game winner ever again. That's just not going to happen. So it's a shame. And I don't know whoever figures out how to help pitchers, not get hurt in a 162 game season, that person is going to be worth gold. It's just happening way too much.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of situations where it's been blamed, obviously, on the fact that pitchers are throwing in the 90s now. If you get down into the 80s, they're worried about your velocity. The second thing is I heard some rumblings toward the end of the season that the pitch clock was rushing pitchers into throwing before they were ready. But I don't think that pitch clock is going anywhere because it's sped up games to the point where people are now, happy with 2.5 hour games as opposed to 6.5 hour games, what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's going to, change anything.
For me personally, I mean, I sort of think, I wonder if there is something in the analytics where you get almost too much information that causes you to do something that you're physically not capable of. Like, well, Don and John, your spin rates are not quite what they ought to be. So you ought to snap that elbow a lot harder to get a little bit more on your curveball or on your slider or on your fastball. And I'm just wondering if that plays a role in it. And there's a part of me that thinks that this sort of like specialization of kids from the time that they're very young, where it's like you do, play travel ball year round. You play, you're a solo sport person instead of, hey, okay, well, baseball season's over. Well, let's play football now. Okay, well, that's over. Let's play basketball now. Let's play, volleyball. Let's do something else. I don't know if that's a part of it, but certainly nobody seems to have the answer. And for all the money that's being made in Major League Baseball, you'd think that somebody would have come up with something by now.
Well, we have this new sport, which we didn't have even 10 years ago, where very large people, very strong people, hit a lot of home runs and pitch the ball at 105 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And you're quite right that there's a question about whether this actually can be done with any regularity for more than a couple of years. Who was the kid who used to pitch for the San Francisco Giants just about 6-7 years ago when he won a couple of Cy Youngs?
Tim Lincecum?
Yeah. And he did get hurt and he faded away. I mean, he was bound for a Hall of Fame career, they said. And for a while it seemed like it, but then, sap.
The interesting thing about Tim Lincecum is that he wasn't a big guy. And physically, when he threw the baseball, I mean, it was a contortion.
Yes.
And he was able to do it for this, a handful of years, won those 2 Cy Youngs, got the Giants, to at least 2 World Series. He wasn't a part of the third one that they won. And then toward the end of his career, when he was still trying to hang on, he was with the Angels. And I remember watching one of his games, and it's like, you're just praying, please survive this. And he couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, there were pitchers that came back from injuries, and they were, I'm trying to remember the name of the pitcher that broke his arm while he was throwing a pitch.
Dravecki.
Now
Dave Dravecki.
Yeah.
He had hurt himself. Well, he was also fighting cancer and eventually lost that arm.
Yeah.
How he even got to the point where he could throw the baseball again was sort of amazing.
I mean, this is the thing about baseball, like any other sport. Just about everybody on the field is hurting in some way after 162 games. It's just about everybody. I mean, I think it's very, very fair to say that Bryce Harper is playing with pretty much only one arm. He's got one arm and wrist that have been killing him since the All-Star break, but he still goes out and does it. But then we have Suarez, right, Don? He's got something wrong with his back or something.
Oh, yeah. Ranger Suarez was like the pitcher of the hour for the first half of the season, and then he hurt his back, and he came back, and he scheduled a pitch, Game 4, and nobody is expecting him. Well, the Phillies went from a top 5, including Suarez is the 4th pitcher, and then Taijuan Walker is the 5th. But Taijuan Walker was fading, but it was okay because he was the 5th starter. But now they don't have a fifth starter. Everybody they've tried, including bringing up rookies from A-ball, got slammed in the fifth. So they really only have 3 pitchers. And the fourth pitcher is iffy with Suarez, and then they don't have a fifth, which they don't need for the playoffs. But still, next year, now you're going to have to go pitcher shopping in order to fill out your rotation.
The Dodgers went into this season, that they had solved this, problem that they had with losing pitchers through the season. 10 pitchers that they could have selected to be their starters. They traded for Tyler Glasnow. They'd signed James Paxton. Kershaw was going to come back. He wasn't back yet. Walker Buehler was coming back. They had Bobby Miller, who had pitched really well the year before. They were going to get back. Who else were they? Gavin Stone, who had been roughed up. They had a whole number of pitchers that they were going to bring in. And one by one, they got, all of them they brought Bell, and they had Yamamoto too.
Yeah.
Yamamoto gets hurt middle of the season, misses a couple of months. Tyler Glasnow doesn't finish out the season, which a lot of people thought might happen because he'd never finished out a full season. James Paxton, who was winning games but not pitching well, got released, went to Boston, then got hurt, and then decided to retire. Gavin Stone, who was fabulous throughout the season, gets hurt toward the end. Kershaw tries to come back. A new problem crops up. So they, now you're down to, Jack Flaherty. Yamamoto's back, but not sharp. Buehler's back. He's going to pitch then on Tuesday, and hasn't been sharp. And Bobby Miller, they sent him down to the minor leagues. And, you're wondering what's happening. I mean, the same thing happened with the Braves. They had Spencer Strider and Chris Sale, and they're both gone. Sale, we thought for sure was going to pitch against the Mets. Didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact,
done.
They didn't start Sale. I think the last game he pitched was September 19th.
Yeah.
They didn't start him in the last couple of weeks of the season because something was wrong with him, but they wouldn't say. But
right, it was much worse than they were giving out.
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing with Ranger Suarez. I think whatever was wrong with his back is really wrong because he's not able to get up anymore. And I know for a while in the beginning of the season, the Phillies had Spencer Turnbull, who they got from Detroit, and he pitched a lot of good games. And when he was pitching good and Taijuan Walker was going down, they said, "Well, switch the two." And then Turnbull, ironically, pitching in Detroit, hurt himself. They said it was a tweak in his arm, but he hasn't pitched since. So the tweak is a little worse. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of situations too where someone's hurt, and to gain a competitive advantage or whatever, the clubs don't come clean on how badly they are.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have longevity in baseball, I think the thing to be is either a backup catcher or a left-handed reliever who can throw for 1 inning. And if you are either of those two, you won't get a gigantic contract, but you'll get a contract and you'll be around late into your 30s and have a nice career as a baseball player. If you don't have a bullpen that's got, most teams, what are they carrying now on the playoff roster? 13 pitchers?
12 or 13.
The Dodgers are carrying.
Gee whiz.
It's
well, and because they're all planning to have at least one, probably 2 bullpen games. Yeah. That's the new strategy, that we're going to have a bullpen game. And, I wish there was a law against bullpen games because they're usually awful.
Yeah.
The ball's flying out of the ballpark and it's almost like saying, well, we'll lose this game, but we'll win in 2 days. No, it's brand new. Whoever heard of an on purpose bullpen game in the old days? It's
or that lovely gift to baseball from the Tampa Bay Rays, the opener.
Yes.
Where a bullpen guy will come out and pitch the first inning and then go home.
I'm having trouble accurately keeping statistics because I can't tell how good, the earned run average, which is a stat that's been around forever and a day, is based on 9 innings. Well, that's pointless now. Nobody's throwing 9. So do we have an earned run average, a per inning earned run average? Is that what we're looking at now?
They love pitchers now that have an ERA under 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
The earned run average, that you used to be proud of was something that was under 2 or under 2.5.
That's a good point, because you're working fewer innings, but during those innings, if you let up 1 or 2 runs, that could add a whole run to your. You did that 2 or 3 times. Suddenly, you have a higher. The ERA has gotten. Yeah, you're quite right, Nick. It doesn't really mean anything now. It's.
Yeah, I don't know what the stat is. They don't show you things like inherited runners scored, it's just kind of like, I guess, or maybe there should just be a stat of how many times did you come in a game and screw it up,
Or how many times do you come on and the guy before you left 3 men on base and you let them all score, which doesn't affect you, but kills the guy that just walked off the mound.
The other guy gets.
Hey, let's talk about your favorite team in this whole rigmarole here. And that's the Cleveland Guardians. They played small ball to a great advantage in that first game to beat the Tigers, and they did a lot of things right, and that's something you've been saying all season long.
They're such an interesting team because I think that they have sort of embraced baseball reality. Like they have a tremendous bullpen, and they just say, okay, well, look, if we're going to win, this is what we've got to have. And so they have they have Emmanuel Clase, who's just a fabulous relief pitcher. And then Cleveland has a history that goes back all the way to, I don't know, Chico Carrascal or back to the 50s, where they were very good at scouting and signing players out of Latin America. And they've done a very good job of it. And then they find players that nobody else really knows anything about. Stephen Kwan, and who is finally coming out of a long slump. I mean, he was hitting like 390, 380 for a good part of the season. They just know how to, and they sort of embrace the fact that a lot of their guys will probably leave after a little bit of time. But they're very versatile. They're a very good team. They're smart. They've got, the organization has done quite well. And I would like to see them go, a little bit further if they could. I mean, I like watching the Tigers too. It's just amazing because you could see what the Tigers were doing, trying to build through the draft. But the Guardians are good year after year after year, with not a lot of attention ever paid to them.
It was interesting too. Like I said, I was watching that last game between the Orioles and the Kansas City Royals. It was just interesting to watch how the Royals took a bunch of guys. Who's that guy? Who's that guy? Who's this guy coming up? What has he done? Yeah. And yet they were playing good ball. Bobby Witt Jr. is the only one that you know because he's something on a superstar level. But everybody else was doing their part, playing what they needed to play, doing what they needed to do, and getting it done. And I guess that's a good way to advance, especially in a short series. If you play good, solid baseball, you're going to make it through.
We could go forever, Nick, talking to you about baseball, because all three of us love it so much. We all played it when we were kids. We grew up in a state where you can play baseball 365, which is California. Yeah. And this season, these playoffs have had some of the best baseball I've ever seen. And we're just going to have to do it again. Maybe at the end of it all, once there's a World Series victor, we can look back and try to make sense of it. I know you can do it because you're so good at it. Thank you for being on the Musical Innertube.
I love this. This is what I do with friends, and you're sitting in the stands of the ballpark. This is what you do throughout a ball game. I'm so glad you guys call. I appreciate it. I mean, I'll do this in December. Hot stove. Okay, wait, trades. All right, no problem.
Yeah. Hey, do we want to make predictions? Do we want to say who we think is going to be in the World Series?
I'll do it.
Okay.
I have no problem being wrong.
Who do you think?
I I am intrigued by the Cleveland Guardians. I really am. I think that, as good as the Yankees are, I think Cleveland just is a smart baseball team, and I would sort of like to see them. I know maybe the TV networks don't really dig on that, but I would like to see it. And in the National League, of course, my heart's with the Dodgers because I'm such a big Dodger fan. But look, you couldn't see as many Padre games as I've seen and not go, well, these guys are scary. And they're playing really, really well. I would, and personally, I would hope that the Phillies can straighten this out and be the Phillies that we saw, early on in the season with everybody healthy and everybody playing well. I'm not sure I can pick amongst those three. I know that people are saying, oh, the Mets, Magic. I don't really buy too much into Magic. I sort of think if you're a good team, eventually that's going to show. So I would like to see the Guardians. Of course, I'd like to see the Dodgers, but I would not be surprised at all to see the Phillies or the Padres. None of that would surprise me. And I would, enjoy the World Series no matter what it is. And I know that, the TV networks, well, they're going to be sad because it would be, if it was the Guardians and the Padres. Too bad. I don't care. I'm still going to watch the games.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thanks for coming on. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.